Hello there. Welcome to another midweek meditation. I am Reverend Devin, and this is a weekly meditation that I do for my churches in Hyde Park, Bakersfield, and Jeffersonville, Vermont. This is also a meditation that I do for anybody who's joining in over YouTube and is looking to nurture a progressive faith. If you're looking for a second opinion on how we can build up a loving faith within our lives, I hope that you like and subscribe, and please feel free to share these videos with anybody you feel called to.
Our reading today comes from 1 Peter chapter 2, verses 2 through 10. Like newborn infants, long for the pure spiritual milk, so that by it you may grow into salvation. If indeed you have tasted that the Lord is good, come to God, a living stone, though rejected by mortals, yet chosen and precious in God's sight. And, like living stones, let yourself be built into a spiritual house, to be a holy priesthood, to offer spiritual sacrifices acceptable to God through Jesus Christ. For it stands in Scripture, "See, I am laying in Zion a stone, a cornerstone chosen and precious, and whoever believes in him will not be put to shame." To you then who believe, he is precious, but for those who do not believe, the stone that the builders rejected has become the very head of the corner, and a stone that makes them stumble, and a rock that makes them fall. They stumble because they disobey the word, as they were destined to do. But you are chosen, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, God's own people, in order that you may proclaim the mighty acts of him who called you out of darkness into his marvelous light. Once you were not a people, but now you are God's people. Once you had not received mercy, but now you have received mercy.
So today, I want to talk about the epistle reading from 1 Peter chapter 2. And this is another one of those become stones worthy of God's love sort of things. We are the stones from which God builds God's church. It's a metaphor that is used often, and the unfortunate side effect of that is it makes it really difficult to come up with original children's sermons based off of this theme when you've done it a dozen times already. But I think it is an easy metaphor for us to grasp when it comes to trying to relate the message of Jesus Christ into our own lived lives. And it is an important message for us to wrestle with, especially during Easter, because what Peter is talking about in this passage is the way in which God's love can turn us into new people. It can transform us, it can resurrect us, and I think that this is an important message for the season of Easter. Because while Easter Sunday in a lot of ways is about Jesus and chocolate eggs and bunnies, and we don't ask how bunnies lay eggs, the season following Easter Sunday is about the apostles and how they graduated from being disciples into these leaders of the church. And by extension, it's also about us, the imperfect people who try to keep the message of Jesus Christ alive in the world today. I think that Peter is an excellent spokesperson for this mission of love within the world, and who exactly has a right to be a part of it, because Peter himself is a person with a lot of flaws. And I think the real strength of Peter is that he is able to recognize those flaws, and he's able to transform himself into a better person by living into this ministry that Christ called him towards. We see a lot of Peter's mistakes in the biblical narrative, from him rejecting Jesus on the cross to him rejecting Gentiles. And then as he wrestles with those mistakes, he becomes a much more developed and better representative of God's love in the world. He recognizes when he makes a mistake, and then he moves to correct those mistakes and do better. Peter is a person who started off as a fisherman, who probably had no ambitions in life beyond just being able to make a living for himself and provide for his family. And he ended up being the Bishop of Antioch, a leader of the church. And while that probably was not the most impressive thing in his time, it definitely was not something that he thought he was going to be doing with his life. And so this letter that we have from Peter, we also need to keep in mind that Peter was illiterate, like Jesus, and so he would not have written this letter. He either had somebody write it for him, or somebody wrote this in honor of him. But this letter talking about how the love of God can nurture us and sustain us and grow us and turn us into the building material that makes God's church a reality in the world. This is coming from a person who knows what he's talking about, and a person who I think understands where we are coming from as people who maybe feel a little overwhelmed by the enormity of what it is Christ calls us to do. Jesus calls us to change this world. Jesus tells us that we can save this world from all the dysfunction, the hate, and the evil that exists within it. And I think any normal person is like, why the hey would you feel I'm capable of doing that? What superpower do I have that makes it so I can confront all the things that are messed up within this world? I'm not Superman. I'm not Batman. I'm not Spider-Man or Captain Marvel. I am just a person who has messed up a lot in life. I think that a lot of people come to the church feeling like they are not capable of doing church. They're not capable of being leaders or apostles the same way in which Peter or Paul or Mary were apostles. And I think that when we listen to this passage, the message that we get is, actually you are enough. You are more than enough. Because the church that Jesus Christ was trying to build was a church that was built of imperfect people who come from all walks of life, like us everyday Joes and Janes. A lot of people come to my churches with stories that relay in some way that they do not feel like they fully belong. Maybe they had a altercation with a clergy person because of a divorce. Maybe they had a bad experience trying to get a child baptized because they weren't married when that child was conceived. Maybe they had a bad experience because they came out as being gay, lesbian, or transgender, and their congregation did not accept that and cast them out. And I think that these type of stories are very common in a church that is composed of imperfect people, not to forgive those imperfections, but rather to recognize that the church in which Jesus Christ is trying to build on earth is one where people are constantly trying to be transformed. And some of us, unfortunately, are more comfortable with the idea of transformation than others. The theme of Easter is that we are all being reborn through the love of Jesus Christ. It's not just Jesus who's doing the heavy work for us. We should be doing that work as well. And so we should be asking ourselves, how is it that God's love is able to transform us into the type of people who are able to sustain a movement, a transformational movement that is guided by Christ's love within this world? And I think that we see that every day through the actions of people who are guided by love, maybe not necessarily a theology that is Christian rooted, but are still guided by love to try to make the world a better place. Here in Vermont, we have a big problem with opioids, and we have a lot of community members who are just going out into their communities and trying to do their best to help people deal with addiction and recover from addiction and find jobs and rebuild their lives after being torn down by addiction. We have a lot of people within our communities who are struggling with housing and homelessness and trying to pay their bills, and we have a lot of people who are working hard to try to overcome those obstacles and help people overcome those obstacles, and we don't always do a good job. We don't always do the the job perfectly in a way that helps people get out of the rut that they're in. But I think that the idea of Christ is that we should be trying. We should be considering the things that make it hard for us to live into God's love, the way in which somebody like Peter recognized that, okay, my belief that Christianity is a Jewish tradition and that people who are not Jewish shouldn't be a part of it was wrong. I need to change the way I think about things. I need to change who I am, make myself a better stone. Peter was also the type of person who was like, okay, my fear of the crowd when Jesus was being put to death was wrong. I need to be more confident, I need to be more forceful, and I need to be a leader of this movement. And he did. He changed himself. And in the book of Acts, we see him step up to the plate and confront the very people who put Jesus to death. And keeping Jesus' message alive. We don't need to be perfect cornerstones of Christ's love in the world in order to be transformed by God's love. And I don't think that that's what Jesus is asking us to do. When Peter says in this passage that the stone that mortals rejected has been transformed into something that holds up the entirety of this world, I think he's not just talking about Jesus Christ. I think he's talking about those things within our hearts that cause us to reject our ability to hold up a movement of love within this world. We need to keep in mind that a lot of the movements that have transformed this world for the better are movements that were community rooted. The abolitionist movement, the civil rights movement, the women's suffrage movement. When we think about things like Stonewall and the LGBTQ community standing up and saying, look, we need a voice for ourselves. When we think about the voice of people who are immigrating into our country and need human rights, and the people that are standing up for themselves and pulling together allies and friends to make it so their voices are heard. This is the type of movement of love that Jesus was trying to create in the world. And Jesus and Peter, and even somebody who was a genius and crazy and egotistical like Paul, understood that it doesn't work unless we have everyday people who are willing to let God's love into their heart and see how that will transform them into a more loving person. All right, I think I said what I need to say. Peace be with you, and may the 4th be with you.